Good Le morning, as they say in Le Mans. I don't know. France.
Used tampon here from Sonic Rush to you.
Jon used tampon Symons
Yeah.
from some channel where amps are present. Right?
You know what annoys me?
What?
When my viewers comment, which they do, and then they say, you know what? The audience doesn't care. The audience doesn't hear a difference between.
Oh, we're talking about Tonewood already.
Yeah, we're going. Well, not just tone. Let's talk about guitar tone in general and about how much that matters and to who that matters.
I'm going to say let's not.
Okay.
Let's talk about the wood itself.
Okay.
By the way, why are you wearing sunglasses?
Because the light is. On the
That's
bright
no.
side.
That's a soft box. That's not very bright. Because you look like this guy. Like, can't possibly look my audience in the eyes. Because there's no sun here. You tampon. It's probably offensive to someone, but okay, that's fine. Let's talk about, because people say Tonewood and tone and doesn't change the tone.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? What is tone? Because there is, for me, a difference between sound
Mm-hmm.
and tone. And I think sound, we all kind of know what that is. I don't think that you or me have adequately defined what guitar tone is, because guitar tone is not guitar sound.
It's a multi-layered concept.
So let's go into sound.
Mm-hmm.
You tell them what you think guitar sound is and how you change it and how it is achieved.
Mm-hmm.
And then I do the same thing.
Well, there are many aspects to it.
Okay.
Sound is not just an EQ curve, but there's like the final stage, like the packaging of a tone is the
Of a guitar sound.
of a guitar sound. Yeah, sound. Okay.
Not guitar tone. You have to distinguish, because
Yeah.
it's for the Tonewood debate or the guitar tone debate. It's absolutely imperative that we distinguish what a tone is or what makes up guitar tone
Yeah.
versus sound.
Yeah.
So right now, sound. What do you think guitar sound is made of?
Well, an EQ curve.
Frequency response. Absolutely.
Frequency
How
response.
much treble, mids,
Yeah.
and low end is there in what proportions?
Saturation.
Gain.
Yeah.
So there's gain,
Mm-hmm.
but there's also very saturated gain,
Mm-hmm.
meaning super dense.
Yeah.
Then there's more open gain. So you could have more gain, but it's still a more open sound and not quite as dense. And even those terms are really tough to. We know what we feel when we hear it,
Yeah.
but how do you describe? It's a very saturated, meaning more dense gain or sound. How do you explain this to my wife, for example, who does? It's very difficult, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Because when you play an amp that's very saturated, it's easier to play. As the player, it's a different experience. But I think the listener can't really hear that as well as the player itself.
It's a thickness, but not a thickness in when we think thick, we might think frequency response. We think EQ curve, we might think low end.
Or low mids or.
But that's not the thickness we're talking about. We're talking about not a lot of air left. Not a lot of. It's just density.
Yeah.
It feels very dense. It feels like you can't really put a lot more instruments on top of that, and they have space in the mix.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe that's how to describe it.
Some amplifiers, for example, when you play high notes, the high notes still sound very thick. And other amplifiers are a little bit more shrill. So it's like very thin sounding.
Yep.
So that's a pretty big difference in terms of the thickness of a tone.
Sound.
Sorry.
So gain, how much makes up the difference in sound? A guitar sound can have more or less gain.
Yeah.
It can be more or less saturated, so how thick and dense it is. Those would be exchangeable, interchangeable words, right?
Yeah.
Density, saturation, thickness of tone, right? So thickness, we don't necessarily mean low end.
No.
Okay. So when we use words like how punchy it is, now this could go into frequency response. It could go towards the low end portion. But we're already getting into the tone, which we're not talking about yet, because punchy is also responding. So we just have to define what these words that we use mean. And some of them, sound, will be created after the guitar. I think sound is primarily created after the guitar, after the pickups, what comes out. To a degree, we get to this. But pedals, I think pedals will drastically change the sound, right?
Yes.
The amplifier, I think the amplifier less than pedals. I think pedals can push your sound into more different territories than amps can.
Do you mean effect pedals or overdrive pedals and compressors and stuff?
Both. Effect pedals, of course. I mean, a fuzz will make an amp sound drastically different than actually interchanging amps.
I mean, depends on which amplifier. I mean, for example, let's take the Engel Founders Edition, Special Edition, 606 Edition. And that's like a very flexible amplifier, also in terms of the responsiveness of the controls, like the mid and the treble controls. You can make it sound like dark and sort of boxed in, or open it up really. Whereas you have a Marshall JCM 800, for example, the EQ controls are very subtle. So with an amp like that, pedals make a huge difference. But with something like an Engel, you do have quite a bit more range in terms of influencing the sound.
In general, I'm talking like if you throw a tube screamer in front of something, you're really cutting all the low end out.
Yeah.
Okay. More probably than two different amps. An amp plus minus a tube screamer probably makes a bigger difference than two different amps. It's a relatively drastic thing, but even so, let's say you throw in a pedal and it's an octave fuzz. Well, that drastically changes everything. It's a completely different instrument almost.
Yeah.
So my point is, in general, pedals can have a lot of influence over the sound.
Yeah.
Frequency response. There's maybe an extra note. It's an octave fuzz.
Yeah.
You know, whatever. Amps in general, we're getting into more detail. Different amps will, let's say Marshall-y kind of amps. The difference between all these Marshall-y kind of amps or classic rock sounds, they are minute, they are detailed, they are felt, all that, but most of them probably used in a mix will result in the same music. You're not gonna make other musical decisions because you have a Splon versus a Morgan versus a Marshall versus a Deliverance, Friette or whatever. You're gonna make the same musical choices, very likely. But, and that's where Mr. Glenn Fricker is right, when it comes to frequency response, which is sound, the cap makes the most drastic differences.
In terms of the frequency
response.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about you're sitting there, you're listening to the guitar sound, and you have 10 different amps through the same cap. The differences will be small, but they will be there. But they will be in the details.
Yeah.
But you take the same amp through 10 different caps, and it'll be, let's say, the same 10 different amps through the same cap to Leslie will sound the same. She is not going to tell me that it's any different. But the same amp through 10 different caps, she will clearly say, oh, this one sounds big, this one sounds nasal, this one has this top end. And even, of course, the same amp through the same cabinet with different speakers in it will make rather drastic differences. So but that is frequency response. It is technically taking a graphic EQ and doing this on the graphic EQ. That's what the speaker will do.
Yeah.
So to the outside listener, the speaker has the most drastic change on the sound. To the audio engineer, which is what Mr. Fricker is, it has the most change on the sound.
Yeah.
The speaker will not change saturation. It might be perceived slightly differently because let's say an amp saturates very heavily in certain frequency ranges, and then a certain speaker will, of course, highlight certain frequency ranges. So you might perceive tiny differences in saturation, even with the same settings on the same amp with different speakers. But generally, the speaker isn't going back to the amp and changing how much gain there is.
Exactly.
Speaker is not responsible for gain, saturation, attack, which again, we're getting into the other territory, but the speaker is regurgitating what we feed into it and then puts its frequency response EQ on that.
I have to add that some people are pretending that a speaker does way more than it actually does. Yeah, a speaker breathes and moves and stuff, and a speaker distorts. Well, trust me, usually when guitar speakers distort, it sounds like shit.
There is, of course, the smallest speaker distortion. For example, if you're using the UA aux. In the software, it tells you that speaker actually has a resonance and speaker distortion harmonics at those notes. So it actually emphasizes, with a resonant peak probably, certain notes, and you can actually dial in the amount of speaker distortion. I don't hear a fucking difference, okay? But there is such a thing, yes. But we're now talking about...
In general, guitar speakers are very linear, though.
We're talking about details that are felt, imperceivable, irrelevant really to the final product.
Yeah.
But the speaker is frequency response.
Yeah.
A lot of it.
Yeah.
You cannot go to your amp and all of a sudden, with the EQ on an amp, make a speaker sound like a different speaker.
No.
All you gotta do is load up a Torpedo, Cap M, whatever, and just go through the presets. Because what you're changing is speakers.
Yeah.
And you're gonna hear the most ridiculous differences. There's a thing called IRs. I don't know if you know about this.
Tell me more.
It's an abbreviation. It stands for impossible ridiculousness.
I thought impossible rectum, but
Yeah,
or impenetrable rectum.
Impenetrable rectum. Oh wow. Now, when you go through IRs, your sound changes drastically.
Yeah.
Okay, with the same source material.
Yeah.
The amp is responsible for saturation, EQ a little bit, of course.
It's the broad shelves in general.
How open, how again also attacky, how punchy that can be amp. Let's say the word punchy, which is probably how fast and precise the low end response.
I think transient information. Yeah, and also in the mids, like a Marshall, the crang and the cuts. That's quite a punchy sound, I think, because of the transient, and that's the attack for people who don't know what a transient is.
Now, obviously, a speaker and how fast it responds has an impact on that to a smaller degree. So, for me, sound, guitar sound, I love this, guys, sound, is everything after the guitar, most after the guitar. So, how is the amp set up? How saturated is it? How much gain? How dense?
Yeah.
The effects, because let's talk about Eddie. Eddie's sound, there's a flanger, phaser. People want his boss delay because that's his sound. So a lot effects, effect, is the word, the sound, right?
Yeah.
Which is then shaped frequency-wise through the speaker. Honestly, and I think I think it's one of the most well-kept secret in our world. That most amps through the same cab can sound almost indistinguishable from each other.
I tend to be very I'm somebody who really pays attention to the details, and I find the details very important, let's say. So I'm not the first person or the quickest person to make that claim, but I definitely understand what you're coming from, because my viewers sometimes when I do amp comparisons, they say, well, they kind of sound the same. And then I'm like, but I hear the little differences, you know what I mean?
But to the end result,
Yeah,
on an album, in context,
yeah.
it is it is pretty irrelevant, these differences.
The audience doesn't care.
No, that's not the same. But even me as an engineer and arranger, these differences are negligible. I had a guy here, I don't know, what was it? No, it wasn't Nick Johnson, it was someone else. So we were playing my Rev 740, which nobody would say sounds like a Marshall, right? My Rev 740, it's a 40 watt amp, whatever, and on top I had a borrowed BE 100. So that's a Friedman. And we were going back and forth with the MP switcher, and I literally set up the Rev to sound at this point indistinguishable, because I was going click, 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 and we didn't look at the number. We didn't know where we were. We had no idea. It sounded exactly the same. The point is, you can set up a BE 100 and a Rev 740 to sound identical. Now, the Rev 740 will go into a territory with different settings where the BE can't go and the BE can go. So, but it is absolutely possible on my amp wall to set up, I'm going to say 6 of those amps.
Yeah.
To almost sound indistinguishable, and you will play the same parts with it in musically useful settings where it doesn't matter which one you use. Okay.
Let's say that, let's pretend for a second that amps are planets. Okay. Here's a planet, here's a planet, here's a planet, and they all, you know, are on certain places. And then when you dial the controls in a certain way, the planets will sort of align, and they will, at that setting, definitely sound similar. But some players will prefer this planet over here, and the other will play prefer this planet over here, etc. So it's not just about I mean, amps have a big range. I mean, some amps have a bigger range than other amps and stuff, but it's one thing to look at an amplifier and say, hey, you can make it sound the same as this, but that doesn't give you the whole picture. That's
Absolutely.
just what I want, the thing that I wanted to add.
I do feel, though, that the amp has, for me, not no relevance, but probably the least relevance to sound. I think with a pedal, I can go more drastic in whatever directions. With effects, of course, I mean, put a phaser on something, you know, so to the average listener, they can immediately tell, something changed.
Of course.
With the cab, you can immediately tell something changed. With exchanging in the amp, most people cannot necessarily tell that something changed. It's also with an amp, people, you know, it's spongy and the sag, what do I care? But the thing is, that is something you feel, and not necessarily hear. I can't necessarily hear how saggy a power amp section is, but as a player, you can feel it, how responsive it is. And depending on what you play, when you play genty stuff where you need it right there, you don't want it to be mushy and squishy and spongy and all these words. But that is all sound. And I think a guitar sound can be set up. It can be set up in a modular. We can replicate it and all that to varying degrees. Oh, talking about relevance of those details. He just made a video where he's compared a real rectifier to the rectifiers.
Rectum fryers
In a bunch of modulars.
Yeah.
And the differences between the modular and the real thing were more or less apparent when we heard the guitars isolated. But as soon as you had it in the track and there was a bass under it, well, it doesn't matter how much bass or not bass there was in the guitar signal, because the actual bass compensated for that.
Yeah.
Now, how much punch, how much impact was there on the attack? Well, that mattered when the guitar was isolated. In context, you had a kick drum to compensate for that. So as soon as you have it in context, the differences that I clearly heard, and they were still small, but those, they went away. All of a sudden, in context, it didn't matter anymore, because the whole band compensated for what the sound did or didn't do. And when we say the audience doesn't care, I don't necessarily think that is 100%. Nah, it is. I think what it should be in context, it matters a lot less because the audience, when they're not guitar players, the average audience doesn't know what an isolated guitar sounds like. They actually do not know what a bass
Yeah.
sounds like.
But by the way, that's one of the reasons why I do a lot of full mix demos in my videos, because to me, it's important to hear how a guitar tone functions in context.
Absolutely, that's the only thing that matters.
Yeah, but people got so annoyed by it that I'm creeping in more isolated sections so that just to please the viewers.
But it's the only thing that matters because
Yeah.
we play guitar in music.
Mm-hmm.
And in music, if it works in a band context,
Yeah.
then it absolutely doesn't matter what it sounds like isolated. The thing is, a lot of people want it isolated with all the low end. We're going to EQ the low end out anyway, right? I mean, it only matters what it sounds like in context. Revs, for example. Revs don't have this massive, chunky, low chug because you don't need it.
They work really well in a mix.
Because that low chug is actually what you try to get away from with a rectifier by putting a tube screamer in front of it. So you're trying to tighten it because the amp itself has too much of that low end. Now revs don't come with that low end because you don't fucking need it. You're gonna get rid of it later on anyway. So with the rev, you don't need to push it or boost it or whatever you guys call it.
Yeah.
Because it just works right out of the box.
The revs are very well designed for the end result.
Yes.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, they really take that into account. When I was making the video for my Generator 120 Mark III Revision B, that's a mouthful, I was really impressed by how the guitars were standing tall in the mix. Like they paid great attention to the frequencies that actually matter in a mix, which is the mid frequencies, of course. And that worked out really well.
But when you compare it with a cab in the room and you put on the rectifier, look, and then you play the rev, like, wait, why aren't my pants moving? Like, because that's not where the guitar is. That's what the bass and the kick drum is going to do. So,
in defense of the rectifier, though, that's like an amp that can work really well in a mix where other instruments need to be a little bit more forward. So if you have, I don't know, let's say an orchestra or something, or a lead guitar player or a saxophone player, that doesn't happen in metal very often, but those use a lot of mid-range. So then you could say like, oh, for that context, a rectifier would work a little bit better because it leaves room because it's so scooped for other instruments. But in general,
however, there's technically always EQ in a mixing session.
True.
And you can make, if there's a saxophone solo, you're going to make space for, during my solos, for example, rhythm guitars always just go down.
Yeah.
I just drop the rhythm guitars because all of a sudden the lead guitar, oh, look, you can fucking hear it. You know, because guitars will fight with each other in terms of space.
Yeah.
But in context, the nuances matter a lot less. I was blown away when I did 3 different tracks with the Blackstar Debut 50. $250, little transistor amp. It's one of those amps that we had back in the day. No USB, no Bluetooth. It's got 2 channels. It's got knobs. It's a beginner / practice / lightweight / simple amp to have. And it sounds pretty okay. It doesn't sound great. So I made a video with that, with the cheapest Ibanez, with the cheapest mic, with a very inexpensive 1-channel interface. The whole setup is $750 with everything. And I recorded 3 songs with it. Now, it's not a great guitar, and it doesn't sound like a great guitar. It's not the best amp, with a SM57 ripoff from Thomann. And all 3 songs, there's a clean, funky singer-songwriter thing. There's a AC/DC mid-gain thing, and a metal drop D thing. And all 3, interestingly, have the guitar by themselves in the intro. And when you hear this, you go like, "Ooh, that's not great." You can clearly hear the too spiky sound of the guitar, emphasized by the probably too spiky sound of the speaker, all that. And then, after a few bars, the band kicks in and the vocals kick in. I will play this for you.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
at that point, honestly, even for me, and I'm aware of it, at that point, doesn't matter anymore. At that point, it's just music. At that point, it turns into, oh wait, everything that guitar sound fell short of is compensated by the band. At this point, didn't matter. And nobody would say, oh, can't listen to that music. Also, how much context matters. We're going to get to tone in a sec. I always say this in my videos. My albums with James LaBrie and Sebastian Bach. These albums, you know, when I actually released albums, they were released worldwide, and I got, I'm not trying to brag, but it's true, I got thousands of reviews from Metal Edge, Metal Hammer, all these big magazines, everything. And most people, and mostly it was between 7 to 10 out of 10. People love these albums. Not a single review, not a single one, talked about the guitar sounds were not good. If anyone talked about anything, it was great production, great production, great production. Which I don't think so, because for me, production also means mix. And the mixes weren't the greatest. There wasn't a lot of low end, the kick drum wasn't doing this. So they used the word production, meaning arrangement. Putting together the instruments, the strings. So it was arrangement more than mix that they meant with production, because I stand by my production, by my arrangements. But not a single one pointed out shit guitar sounds. If anything, it was great production. And all these albums were recorded with a rack-mounted Pod 2. Not a single actual amp on anything. Pod 2 on the recti tread plate setting. You know? I mean, we're talking about no top end, all mushy. This is a shit sound, okay? It's a pretty shit sound. And even with mixing, you can only make it so good. Thousands, not shitting you, thousands of reviews. Go look it up. Not a single one said guitar sounds not good. Because in context, once it's music, it's the music that matters. It's the music that matters. It's the notes and the intention and the lyrics, and everything comes together. And if that is good, then preferably you have a good guitar sound on there, preferably. But if it's not, then that will still not make it a bad song or something people won't enjoy. Which now brings us, wait, slowly, not quite yet, we're going to get to the tone and to the performance. But for example, we talked about Randy Rhoads. Now, how many of you would say that the Randy Rhoads albums, that the Aussie albums that Randy Rhoads played on, how many of you would say those are shit? I don't think anyone, right? Aren't they classics? Fear of the something, and something about the dog, and crazy train. I don't know, those things.
Bark at the Train or something.
Bark at the Train.
Yeah.
So listen to it, if possible, with fresh ears. And just listen to the guitar sound. If it's isolated somewhere, I think it probably is. There's sections where you just hear the guitar sound. You want to tell me that nowadays, with what the sound we can get, the punchiness, the thickness, the fatness, the low end, you want to tell me that that's a nowadays great guitar sound? It sounds as if it's almost like a cocked wah in a way. It's only, there's no low end. It's treble and mids. It is not in any way anything that the snobs out there would say, wow, that's a great sound. Would anyone critique that sound? Would anyone say, oh, well, Randy Rhoads had a shit sound? No, nobody. Because the music that was created with that, by today's standards, relatively thin sound, made us fall in love with metal. Made us love Randy Rhoads, right? I mean, this is a sound that created memories and childhoods. Yet, if I dial that in for you now, what would you say? I give you a guitar, say I'll dial this in. What would you say? You would immediately try to find the bass knob on the amp, right?
Uh-huh.
It's not about the sound. It's about what that sound created and the music that it made. And the music that it makes is not created and inspired by a sound. Because you don't play a sound, you only play a sound to a degree. Punchiness is sound, frequency response is sound, but most of what you feel is what?
Tone.
So what is guitar tone?
It's not an easy, short answer. I can give you a little example. A friend of mine, and this is a long time ago, but he bought this Schecter guitar, and it was a very affordable 7-string guitar, and it was really dead sounding plank. And when I played it, I was like, plays nice. The action was nice and low. The frets were done really well, but it was very dead and dull sounding. He changed the pickups. It was
Keep going.
So
just checking.
I think it had like one of those passive EMGs in it, and then he put some bare knuckles in it because he read somewhere on the internet.
Keep going,
Right.
but it's like way too. We need more. We need. Kiss up.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's better. That's much better.
So he swapped the EMG out for a bare knuckle because he read on the internet that would be the best sounding pickup.
Yeah. It'll totally change your guitar drastically. No, not
And
drastically.
it did change the sound, but the guitar was still dead sounding. And whenever I picked up that guitar, I didn't feel inspired, and I didn't feel like I wanted, despite that it felt good to play, it didn't make me want to create music on that guitar. And maybe even the end result would have been fine, the sound, but in terms of how it felt for me and sounded to me as a player, the tone was very uninspiring. And that's why it's funny to me that people nowadays like to say like wood in a guitar doesn't matter at all. It's complete nonsense because to me anyway, it matters very much.
So the thing is, the whole chain, the wood, the string, where the string is attached, the pickup, the electronics, the cable, the amp, the pedals, the speaker, how are you miking it or IRing it? I'll tell you about IRs later. About the rectums. Each part of the chain does affect, sorry Glenn, the final result, but not each part affects it with frequency response. Not each part affects it with transient. Not each part affects it with sustain. The different parts of the chain have different responsibilities or different abilities. An amp can absolutely affect it, out of everything in the chain, the amp affects the saturation and density more than anything else. I'm going to say that the sound of different guitars, we're talking about sound, remember what sound is for the most part the same. If I take a guitar, clean setting, plug it in, especially in clean because there's less compression, that most guitars will sound the same when our benchmark is how much a pedal can change the sound. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or how much, let's say, in EQ on an amp. If I turn down the treble all the way, that will probably change it more drastically than me going from a vintage Strat to a modern metal guitar.
Yeah, sure.
I can affect the treble portion of the sound
drastically.
more drastically with the treble knob on the amp than changing a different guitar. Right? So guitars, a guitar string through a pickup is a very simple, almost pure tone. A flute is almost a sine wave. Okay, not a lot of harmonics. A guitar string is a relatively pure tone. Not that much harmonic content. Not that much sustain actually. You have a very tacky transient,
Yeah.
and then it goes away relatively fast.
Yeah.
Which is why we like drive and distortion.
Yeah.
Because what that drive and distortion does, you guys know about harmonics? Okay, so you have a fundamental, that's the actual frequency, let's say in A, 440 hertz. If you heard that, that's just a sine wave. It's a very, very boring note. So let's say I take a low pass filter, okay, Jennifer low pass filter, and I'm sweeping everything up here. That tone will not change because it's just one note, a single thing. And only when I sweep past the 440, all of a sudden this will go quieter. Now, if I have a guitar sound, it has this, it has the octave of it, so it's got 880. It's got the fifth above it, then another octave, then a third, and so on. And they will also ring with it in different ratios. Sometimes the odd ones are louder, sometimes the even ones are louder, sometimes odd and even ones, blah, blah, blah. So how much these harmonics are heard and what the volume relationship is determines what it sounds like. For example, a square wave is, I think, only odd. A sawtooth wave is all of them, and actually all of them going down evenly in volume. And a triangle is kind of like a sine wave, but has a little bit more harmonic content. And every sound we hear, that is a fundamental with certain harmonics.
Yeah.
A bell sound, for example, metal bell from a church, has non-harmonics. So it's not the, double it. It actually has some stuff in between. So why it sounds a little bit dissonant, a little bit weird and metallic, that is because we throw in some frequencies that are not related to the fundamental. And all these relationships matter to what it sounds like. Now, when we add drive and distortion, we make all these for guitar that are on a clean, here's a big note, and then maybe the octave is also there, and everything up here isn't really that loud on a clean guitar. But then with distortion, we're bringing all that shit up.
Yeah.
We're bringing that harmonic content up big time. So the note gets a lot richer, a lot thicker, and all of a sudden it could sound like a saxophone type, a violin, because a violin and a saxophone, they have ridiculously more harmonic content than a clean electric guitar.
Like the waveform gets turned into a sausage also in terms of the envelope, because usually you have like attack, ping,
And then you loud and then very, very quiet.
and now it's like, bang. So it's a big sausage. I like sausage. A big sausage of a waveform.
Well, because we have more volume for
Yeah.
all the higher harmonics, but we also have more compression.
Yeah.
The tubes compress. So instead of having this big transient and then it goes away quickly, it literally just turns into a sausage.
Yeah.
Which is why we like playing it, because all of a sudden that note literally just remains there.
Yeah.
Which is also why distortion and driving it and saturating it will make the differences in guitars more negligible, because we're masking it with all those harmonics. If a guitar has great sustain and great resonance, well, all of a sudden a lesser guitar with less sustain and resonance performs the same way because we're compressing it. So we're not really comparing it fairly, which is when you have a master guitar, like you played the Panucci, you played the Shabbat Puma, that offset. You can play those clean, without compression, just a clean amp, and you don't really want to reach for a gain knob because they sustain
Yeah.
and ring clean, almost on a level like you would have drive on, right? Did you feel that you did?
Yeah.
I never heard you say, give me more gain, right?
No, it sounded very beautiful, piano-like and full, and
So when you have a guitar that does that,
yeah.
you don't need that much gain to play beautiful solos, and you do the bend and the note is still here. How is that? And you go up a half step. How is that? How is the note still here? A great guitar will do that. An amp is not going to give you more sustain. Not really. Unless it, of course, compresses because of
Yeah.
because of the sound. But the sustain doesn't come from an amp. A speaker will not give you more sustain. Now let's talk about ADSR. Do you know what ADSR is? Do you want to explain ADSR?
Attack. What's the D? I feel like an idiot.
I can give you the D if you want the D. Decay,
Attack, decay,
sustain, release.
release.
Now,
So it's like usually it's like a peak and then an area like this, and then it drops off
now
again.
we use ADSR in synthesis,
Yeah.
and it's called an envelope. So when you hit the note, how quickly is the note there? If your attack parameter is all the way at 0, it's right there when you hit it.
Yeah.
Bam! It's a very immediate attack, immediate transient. Decay, how long does it take from the initial attack to get to the level, to the volume that rings while you're holding the note? Right? So on a keyboard, that could literally be there forever.
Yeah.
Right? So you hit it, bam, decay, it goes here, and then it kind of... No, wait, that is wrong. That is actually wrong.
Okay.
Because ADSR, they're not all volumes or times. Follow me. I have to put an
I'm being
ADSR.
educated.
I have to put an ADSR. So the attack is a time, not a level. How long does it take to go to maximum volume?
Yeah.
So attack is a time value.
Yeah.
Decay is a time value. I'm still looking at the mic. How long does it take to get to the sustain volume?
Yeah.
So as you're holding the note,
Yeah.
as long as I'm holding it, how loud is it going to be? That is a volume. So sustain is a level.
Yeah.
So you're hitting the note. How long does it take to go to full volume? Decay, how long does it take to go to the sustain level? Right?
Yeah.
Sustain is not a time because it's determined by how long you're holding the note.
True.
As long as you're holding the key, that's your sustain.
Yeah.
And that's a level.
Yeah.
So you could have so you had a very so attack is a time, decay is a time,
Yeah.
sustain is a level,
Yeah.
and then release is a time again.
Yeah.
Release is from the sustain level. When I let go, how long does it take for the note to
Die off.
die off?
Yeah.
So you could let go, but it's not immediately gone. That would be 0 sustain. You let go and it's like, well,
Almost with the synthesizer, almost like a reverb.
yeah.
Yeah.
But one has to understand that ADSR is not all level and not all time. It's actually time, level, time. So
Yeah.
let's translate that to, what's with the cars here? Quiet! Let's translate that to guitar. Because we don't have the same controls there. So you pick a note, how fast it goes to full volume. Well, first of all, what full volume is, you control with your pick. How fast it goes there, you could control with pick attack, pick pitch, pick angle. Okay, where you're picking it. For example, you're picking it all the way in the back. It'll be there pretty fast.
Yeah.
So you're picking it in the middle. Well, it's a string. If you're picking it in the middle, it will ring more. It will move more like this.
Yeah.
But get there slower. If you're picking it all the way in the end, you're not going to get the full revolutions, but it'll be quite. I mean, it's physics. Yeah. It'll be faster. So attack you determine with your pick and where you pick. But how fast the note is really there is, I think, determined by the properties of the instrument. Right? We're talking about wood.
Yeah.
And not just wood, we're talking about, as Trevor Wilkinson from Wilkinson Hardware says, well, how it's attached, how the string is attached to the instrument matters. Meaning the nut, the bridge material, the bridge makeup. Is it individual saddles? I'll tell you about that in a sec. Please remind me. And then, of course, to some degree, even though it's already attached up here at the nut, the tuners, because the string is still attached to those, is the
angle.
The angle in the back, is the string going through the body, meaning having more attachment through the whole? Is it in ferrules in the back, or is it in a Floyd Rose, where then the string and the metal piece is attached to only two poles? And all this affects how fast does it reach its maximum peak, and what, to a degree, what frequencies, what kind of sound, frequency response is being achieved at the maximum peak. Is it more treble, and so on. And then there's a decay. How long does it take to go down to where it sustains? But we cannot have endless sustain.
No, it will always have a drop off.
So during the sustain portion, which of course we control a bit with our fingers, but at this point we've let go on the right hand. During the sustain portion, it will go down. So how long does it take to go down? And there isn't a release.
No.
It's pretty much
Unless you have
we don't have a sustain, we have an ADR. We have an ADR envelope. Attack, decay, and release is pretty much without releasing, but it goes to zero at some point. So how long does that take? That is not determined by the pickups.
No.
Except for the pickup has a magnetic field and kind of keeps the string. It has the magnetic field of a pickup will somehow affect, of course, the string. But generally, let's put it this way: the amp has no bearing on the ADR of
the guitar.
The cab, Mr. Fricker, absolutely has no bearing on the ADR of the guitar. None of what has a bearing on that, what has an effect on it, is where the string is attached. And those things are attached to wood. Now, how does that wood affect the vibration of the string? Does it emphasize it? Does it slow it down? Softness, softer glue, softer woods, will eat up that vibration quicker than harder materials.
And you can even go a little bit deeper in looking at a multi-band concept, where you have, like, let's take a very cheap guitar, for example. Maybe with a cheap guitar with bad wood, the higher frequencies will die off sooner than, let's say, 300 hertz or something. So you might have a little bit more sustain, although the sustain might sound dull because of the beautiful harmonics, and the upper frequencies will die off earlier. So it's like, it's not even like one thing. It's like all these different frequencies have their own ADR, ASMR, whatever curve. So it's like, you can go pretty in depth if you were to analyze something like that, I think.
The resonance in what the string will do over time is most certainly affected by the wood. Now we talk about tone wood. Let's get to tone. Because tone is not sound. We don't talk about frequency response. We talk about ADR. We talk about how quickly is the tone there, how quickly does it go down. So sustain, all that. But also, and you learn this when you talk about additive synthesis. Do you know what additive synthesis is?
Tell me.
Okay. In synthesis, you have to have a waveform. We know square, sawtooth, all that stuff. Those are waveforms you can easily create with an oscillator in an analog way. They're very sterile. They're really boring sounds, right? So what subtractive does, which is the good old analog synthesis that we know, Moogs, all that stuff, we start with a very full wind. We start with a very full sound.
Yeah.
We throw all these harmonics in there. We make it square, we make it sawtooth, and it's a super fat sound. And what we actually do is we take an oscillator with, let's say, a sawtooth, and then a second with the sawtooth, and we detune them slightly,
Yeah.
maybe even 3, and make it a very fat sound. We might have one here, one an octave lower, with a different waveform. We try to create a very thick,
Dense. Yeah.
sound. And then we take away from it. We take away from it by means of a filter. We roll off that top end. We maybe have a peak, a resonant peak right there where that roll off is. And then we move that a little bit back and forth, so we've got a little bit of movement in it. We might even modulate the detuning against each other a little bit and keep that waveform here, but tune this up and down a bit so we get a little bit of that sound. So we're creating a very big sound, but then take away
Yeah.
to give it life. Additive synthesis is the opposite. We start with nothing,
Yeah.
and we're building harmonics from scratch. So the K5000S, I think, from Kawai was an additive synthesizer. The problem is additive synthesis is massively complex. It's easy to say I've got 3 oscillators, I put them together, it sounds fat, and I'm taking away, there's my sound. But imagine you have the fundamental, and I can say, okay, that's my fundamental, and now I have about 40 different harmonics, and you can determine the volume for each one independently. Right? So I can say I want that and that and that and that at these volumes. So you make up the harmonic content of your sound yourself. But that is just then one of the oscillators. And you do this 3-4 times and build your own harmonic content from scratch. So it's not a repeating sawtooth, whatever. But then, get this, for each of the harmonics, let's say you have 20 harmonics in the one sound, you have an ADSR envelope. So as you play the note, it might start only with the fundamental and the octave,
Yeah.
and then as these go down in volume a little bit, so attack, decay, the others come up. So they're there from the beginning, but as these go down, these come up.
Okay.
So it starts with a more bassy sound. These are here, but as the sound develops, the top end comes out, right?
Yeah.
And as it develops more, all of a sudden everything goes down, but this one harmonic really comes through. Now, you know when you're playing a lead sound on guitar,
Yeah.
and it really just falls over into this harmonic,
Yeah.
that's literally what happens.
Oh yeah. Cool.
So, all the stuff lower drops
Yeah.
out, and that one harmonic all of a sudden really comes through.
Yeah.
And that is, of course, in interaction between the whole system and the
Yeah.
amp. But I mean, certain notes all of a sudden find this harmonic peak and just
It
beautifully.
can also happen on acoustically.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it can happen because of the amp, but also just because of how the guitar resonates and stuff.
But in additive synthesis,
Yeah.
you are in charge of the attack, decay, sustain, and release of each individual harmonic that you decide is in the sound. And usually it's not for one block of all these harmonics and ADSR, which, by the way, programming takes forever, but then for several. Now, that is what actually happens in real-life instruments. You could easily, actually, do a very, very, very realistic sound with additive synthesis. You could do the sound of a violin note. If you know when what harmonics come in. The problem is, if you program that, each note will be the same.
Yeah.
But of course, with a violin, I do this, and all of a sudden it's different. I change the angle of my bow, and it's different. I go faster, and it's different. That cannot be adequately replicated with additive synthesis. But the thing is, what's happening and where Tonewood comes in is exactly there. I pick the note, and it's not all the harmonics come in equally and go away equally. You might have, on a Strat, a transient that's top end, but your string hasn't really reached its peak vibraty thing, and all of a sudden, milliseconds after that spiky attack, the beautiful low end comes in. It's not all there from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And how the harmonic content changes over time, that's guitar tone. Not only,
Mm-hmm.
that is determined by the physical properties of the wood or carbon or whatever, but
Yeah.
that has something to do with it. And the bridge,
Mm-hmm.
and the string, and your pick, the pick you're using, how you're using it, where you're using it. How it develops later over time is probably pickup, because it has a little bit of effect on the string's magnetic field, of course. But when we talk about sound, so frequency response, the frequency response over time is what the guitar sounds like. And that is this guitar has a great tone. On mahogany guitars, let's actually name things now, name and shame. We think they sound warmer,
Yeah.
when maybe they don't. What does warmer mean? More low mids, more low end? But I think what people mean by warmer, thought about this the other day,
Yeah.
is on the attack. It's not as immediately top-endy as a Strat would be,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So the attack portion of a mahogany guitar or Les Paul, let's say, is the top end comes in a little bit slower, and therefore it sounds not as aggressive, spiky, whatever. The warmness is because the ADSR of the harmonics is different than it is on a Strat, even without a pickup. Now, of course, the fact that it has humbuckers, where the top end will sound less wiry. The single coils will reinforce what the wood is already doing on a Strat. So there's several elements adding to why we think a Les Paul sounds warmer. I'm still looking at the mic. But this is so stupid. But these, you cannot say it's the pickup. You cannot say it's the wood. The wood obviously has an effect on how it resonates. When it has an effect on how it resonates, it has an effect on sustain.
Yeah.
It has an effect on how quickly do certain harmonics develop within the tone.
Absolutely.
And that's the properties of the wood, which could be how long it is aged. It could be how dry it is,
The finish.
Age and drying finish. Hardness is a big thing.
Amount of pieces.
Amount of pieces,
Yeah.
glue joints, set neck, bolt
Thickness
on.
of the neck. And all those
Everything
things.
contributes. Obviously the bridge, obviously the nut, obviously the tuners. We cannot dismiss any of it in how harmonics develop over time when we pluck the string. What definitely has no bearing on any of this is the fucking speaker. Because we haven't reached that. It cannot have any bearing on it, because when you do this, it hasn't reached the speaker. It hasn't reached the amp. It hasn't even reached the cable. So that, the pickup, not in its sound, not in its frequency response, but in its effect on the string, obviously, has an effect on, once the string starts going, well, it's a piece of metal in a magnetic field. What is that magnetic field? Obviously, it will affect the development of the tone over time in a way, which is why Phil X says he only wants one pickup in the back, because the pickup in the front will have an effect on it. It makes total sense.
Yeah.
I love what Trevor Wilkinson taught me. He has this bridge, which is actually a tremolo bridge, but it's got tally settles. So two strings share a brass piece.
Yeah.
Now think about it, and he's fully right. Why does a tally sound different than a Strat? They're the same woods. There's not that much difference. The pickups are not that different. I'm sorry, they aren't. A Strat has 3 pickups, a tally has 2.
Yeah.
So there's maybe magnetic field on it, we can argue that. But on a tally, you go through the body, usually.
Yeah.
That has a different connection.
Yeah.
It has a different angle of the string, almost 90 degrees, going over the actual saddle, right?
Yeah. it's a fixed bridge, of course. Strats usually have floating or
So the actual
tremolo.
bridge, and with its metal attachment that the string sits on,
Yeah.
has a much bigger connection to the actual guitar. But, and this was so brilliant, I never thought of this. On a Strat, you have 6 saddles, as you have on most bridges, right? So the string, the E string, will vibrate. It'll vibrate that saddle. That saddle will, because it's connected to the rest of the bridge, of course, vibrate the rest of the bridge, but it is relatively isolated. On a Tele, that saddle also holds the A string. So
Yeah.
if you play something on the E string and something on the A string, and they are having kind of similar frequencies, you're playing a 1 and a 5, for example, they will actually reinforce each other. You have positive reinforcement of a waveform. Now let's say you play something dissonant. Okay, you actually have vibration cancellation, and they are sharing the same point where they're touching the guitar, so they will absolutely interfere with each other, positively or negatively, because one has to vibrate the other. Even if you're just playing on the E string, you hold your fingers so the A string is completely open. Well, that force of the E string all of a sudden is trying to bring the A string into a resonant, sympathetic vibration.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So therefore, it's actually stealing energy from the E string, and the A string, if it rings open, would also kind of be in the sound, right? Within with some upper harmonics that you didn't even play, but the A string kind of vibrates.
Yeah.
There's an interaction between the two strings that's unpredictable, and that makes a huge difference in why a Tele is a different guitar than a Strat.
Among other things.
Yeah,
I even think that the fact that the Tele is like such a simple slab and a Strat is more contoured also can make a small difference probably. But that's a very interesting that I actually never ever considered. So
the strings are attached to each other through the saddle. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
The point is, Tonewood deniers, pickup deniers, then come on. They all play a role in the final result. But we cannot narrow it down and limit it to, I'm an engineer, I care about frequency response. I'm sorry, Glenn, it's the dumbassest thing I've ever heard in my life, because that doesn't take the player, the performance, the sustain. Of course, to a high gain player like Glenn, sustain doesn't matter because it's all compressed and the note's there anyway, right? But you cannot take the player and the performance out of music, because you know what you have? You have AI if you do that.
Yeah. Oof.
You have no soul. You're reacting to an instrument.
You should make a rant video about AI.
I don't wanna. That's. But you have to. Some things on the instrument are responsible to how you play, how you feel, what notes you play will be determined by the instrument. We just saw that earlier. An instrument where you play, and the note's just there, and I do a slide, note's still there. I do a slide, note's still there. I do a bend, note's still there. I do another half step bend, note's still there. That is a performance that I might do on a lesser instrument, and I wouldn't do it on a lesser instrument, because the note would have died much sooner. And on a higher quality instrument like we had, that note is there because of the bridge, the wood, and all. It all comes together, and then the pickup is responsible for. Is it responsible for sound frequency response? Not
kind of, to an extent,
but not as much as a cab. Glenn's fully right there, right? I've never, and I've done this several times, changed pickups in a guitar and thought it made any difference that I cared about. There's a guitar that I reviewed where you have exchangeable pickups from the back. Clack, 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 clack.
Yeah.
And it was a humbucker, a P90, and a double lipstick. So drastically different pickups. The guitar sounded the way the guitar sounded. The differences were almost negligible, and they were not different humbuckers. They were drastically different pickup styles. One was a little bit more wiry. One was a little bit fuller in the low end, but we're talking about tiny differences. The build of the guitar came through. The guitar had the same tone, sound with all three pickups, because the tone, when we talk about ADSR or ADR, of course the guitar was the guitar. It didn't make it a different instrument, and many people think changing pickups will make it.
There's little nuances. Yeah.
It's not that it's nothing. And to some players playing active EMGs, you have more top end.
You have a tighter low end and a more compressed sound.
Will it make a different mix? No. Frequency response? No. But will it, with the tighter low end, will it change your performance? Yes, it will.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in the end, it's the performance of the player that matters way more than the actual final sound.
Yeah. One example is a couple of weeks ago, I did a video, and to prove your point also, I have two guitars, actually, two of the same guitars, LTD Phoenixes, made of the same wood, same construction, so they sound quite similar. And I had two Seymour Duncan pickups. In one of them I had one type, and in the other I had another type. And in this white guitar, it just felt a little bit too clangy for my taste. And in the other one, it felt a little bit too dull. So I thought, let's swap them around. And then when I swapped them around, I definitely felt like, this is better. And then I put that in the video, and when I listened to the results, and also my audience, they were like, the difference is subtle. Some people could hear the difference. But to me, the difference as the performer who was actually playing the instrument was definitely significant. But for the sound, for the outcome of the listener, it wouldn't matter.
And I get mad at Glenn for dismissing the feeling for the performer.
Yeah.
Because the feeling for the performer will result in a riff written or not, being inspired or not, fighting with the instrument or not, getting the perfect precision metal gallop or not.
Yeah.
Because that could be a string. Glenn says, well, if it stays in tune, it's a good guitar. There's so much more to a performance than staying in tune.
Think about it like this.
Stupid.
I mean, when you're sitting there with your instrument and you're being enveloped in that experience of playing and creating, you're there in the zone, in that little world. You're not in the audience. No, you're right here playing the music and being inspired by the sound that's coming out of the instrument and how it feels in that moment. Let's not pretend like that doesn't matter, because it matters a great deal.
It absolutely matters.
Yeah.
If we go for sound and we judge Randy Rhoads, we're going to say, shit sound, you're an asshole. Ozzy Osbourne, crap music. But it isn't. Mix-wise, nowadays, there's no low end. The kick drum doesn't kick. I mean, but does anyone critique that? Listen to all the music from the 60s, 70s, early, even 80s. There is no fatness. There is no power compared to what we do today. Now you put something on, it's like, boom, 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 and you right through, and none of that is there. So a lot of these kick drums are kick, 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 but you know what? We still love the music. And the music was inspired by the whole chain and by the guitar, by everything. So you cannot dismiss the string. NYXL, D'Addario, whatever, or string, stainless steel, or these New York steel strings versus nickel, makes a difference. It's a tiny difference. Coated versus non-coated, tiny difference. Pickup, I'm going to say tiny difference, but not no difference. Difference in a certain aspect.
Yeah.
In its ADSR development and when what harmonics come in, probably less. When what harmonics come in at what time, way more determined by the string, where it's attached, so the hardware, and most certainly the wood.
Yeah.
If it wasn't that, then why have these high-end builders, whether it's Nick Huber, Shabbat, whatever, that have these great wood stores? Why are their guitars so fucking great? If you play a Nick Huber and you say, well, it's not a good guitar, then you don't fucking know what you're talking about. And he has great quality wood. If you buy a Schecter for $800, that wood is less dried, less aged. It's probably heavier because it still has more moisture in it, and less curated that you take whatever off the shelf.
Yeah, it's more of a guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And but also just the general quality of that material is not of what a high-end builder has, and it is not going to be a guitar like these high-end builders have.
Yeah.
But it is responsible for that ADSR and probably sustain quite a bit. And weight, of course, has something to do with it. But then the electronics have a lot to do with it. And then, you know what, your amp is responsible for. Electronics have more, I think, to do with the top end and resistance and ohms and shit. I don't know about these pots and all that shit. But talk about saturation, has nothing to do with the guitar or your pickups. Absolutely zero. Except for a pickup might push an amp more and therefore you get more saturation. But that's not the pickup. That's just how your amp responds to higher input volume.
One exception would be like the old EMGs, like the 81, they clip internally, but that's like a quirky exception.
I don't even know about that.
In general, you're definitely right, yeah.
So amp is saturation.
Yeah.
Amp is a little bit frequency response because you have an EQ, but actually compared to cab, who cares? Cab is all about frequency response.
Yeah.
And amp is a bit punch, but along with the pickups on the guitar, the point is dismissing everything and saying it's only speaker is asinine. Dismissing everything and saying amp matters the most, asinine. You throw a pedal in front of that amp, I can turn that into a totally different amp. Why is it blinking now? That's media fall. We're fighting with the camera, and I still look at the mic. Each aspect is relevant. That's absolutely true. Absolutely, massively part of the tone. Remember, is your pick, how you hold it, how hard you pick. I mean, we're talking about this is the thing that actually gets the string moving. Don't forget about that. You playing with exactly the same guitar and everything else, and me playing that same thing, even with the same pick, will result in pretty different actually sound, and not frequency response isn't going to be drastically, but it will be different. So your pick, that brings the string into vibration. Where you're picking, where your hand is, how hard you're picking. Because how hard you're picking, you're bringing the string into vibration in a different way than I do, meaning your transient will have a different frequency content than my transient.
Yeah.
Your sustain will have a different frequency content.
Yeah.
Watch Tim Pierce pick. Have you ever watched Tim Pierce pick a guitar? He picks, sorry Tim, I love you, like a little sissy boy. He does this. He has it super loose. I have it here, and we got it, super loose. And it looks like his pick will fall out of his hand any second when he strums acoustic. It's super, he almost barely touches the strings. And he described that one time. He says, well, if let's say the string is already in motion, when you're picking hard, you're breaking that motion, and it's got to reattack, and you actually might be, stopping it in the worst way and have to bring it back into a vibration. Whereas if you pick very lightly, you are keeping it going.
Yeah.
And therefore, you're very likely continuing the frequency content that the string already established, and you just keep it going instead of stopping it, all your low end's gone, we have the transient again, and the low end needs to come back in by when he strums power chords, for example. We would go gone, 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 gone. So we always have transient, and we probably don't give the low end enough time to actually come in. Whereas he goes, dun, 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 he keeps it going.
Yeah.
And has therefore likely a fuller sound all the way through the riff. It doesn't look cool, Tim. It's not very rock and roll, but he is the most recorded guitar player probably in history. So there's a reason for that.
Also, like, my thumb is a little bit weird, so my pick has a different angle towards the strings than other players, and that might probably also affect the tone. My tone is probably a little bit different than other players because of that fact also.
Yeah, strumming lightly is something that goes against our metal minds, but it's not the worst idea. And especially in metal, when you're strumming, when you're picking really hard, the pitch of the string, because you're bending the string, is going wee 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 all the time.
Also,
Tim doesn't do that. he has a much more even tuning. So all this affects the final result. Some of it affects the final result in musical choices and what musically happens and how you feel about it and how much emotion and passion is in it. Some of it affects it in how many frequencies happen during the note at what point in time. Some of it affects it, like the speaker, in how much mid, treble, and bass is there. How quacky is it? Some of it affects it in how dense is the distortion, how open is the distortion, how fuzzily is it if you play JTM and you crank it, you know, how compressed is it? You dial back the volume and then a JTM becomes clean but super compressed. It's not easy. It's not an exact science because a guitar builder cannot tell you exactly what comes out when they start building a guitar. But dismissing any part of it is asinine. The speaker doesn't matter, it's stupid. The amp doesn't matter, it's stupid. The amp matters for a certain thing.
Yeah.
And the wood, yeah, idiots, matters for a certain thing. I love dark necks. I love rosewood, wenge. I like the feel of those. Maybe in my head, it's a harder tone. Who gives a shit? Whatever I feel when I pick up the instrument is going to affect how I play it.
It's also just fun to care about the little nuances. And
That's nerdy. Going on forums and just fighting over it is nerdy. Making videos about it in stupid UDIs is idiotic and nerdy.
I think caring about it is fun. I've been listening a lot again to you talking, but
Sorry, that's what I do.
But it's refreshing to hear somebody talk about it who respects the little nuances, you know, and who values and who doesn't say it's a small or nuanced little difference, so it doesn't matter. Dismissing it, that's absolute nonsense.
If it affects your musical choices,
Yeah.
then that's the biggest difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
The biggest difference that can, if you choose to play an A instead of an E,
Yeah.
well, then that's the most drastic choice on a recording that you can make. More drastic than any speaker will ever do. More drastic than anything, because you just changed the music.
Yeah.
In that regard, what we said yesterday, a delay is an arranger because it actually adds note. That pedal is the most, probably even more drastic choice than anything you would ever make. Don't dismiss a delay. That's not sound. That's actually adding notes. So that's a delay is an arranger. It arranges your music differently. So anything that makes you play different notes, a guitar that sustains longer, we noticed that earlier. You played much less on great guitars because the notes there, I don't need
And they
to play.
sound so beautiful, and you want to listen to those notes for a longer period of time. You want to hear that note sing.
So you play,
Yeah.
John Mayer has great guitars. So he plays solos with 3 notes because the guitars allow you to do that. If you have a lesser guitar, nothing against those, but you will probably, the notes gone, so you might attack it again. Well, you just made a musical choice because you played 2 notes.
Yeah.
You might go to the next note. You might want to play that fast arpeggio because, well, you don't have the sustain in the guitar. But the instrument is making you make different musical choices. More sustain means you will play less. You will let the notes sit there. A nice open chord on a JTM with a little bit of edge of breakup, it makes you open, makes you spread out your arm and, I want to fly, whatever. A super saturated chug tone, you play it open, but it's different. It's not a free, I fly around sound. It's a, I push this wall over sound.
Yeah.
Emotionally, it makes you feel differently. Therefore, you play it differently. Everything matters.
By the way, music is emotion.
Tonewood deniers, you guys are idiots. We just covered everything on a guitar affects its ADR envelope. And within that envelope, frequencies come in and go away at different times. Look up additive synthesis. I studied that shit, I should know. And that's what's happening in a guitar. And obviously, the thing that the string is attached to has a bearing on that. There's of course that Jim Little video where he attaches strings to a table and strings, but the thing is, in that video, he strums a chord. In pickup distance, absolutely matters. There he shows that, and everything that open, the sound frequency response is absolutely the same, but we cannot measure sustain. He doesn't measure that there. He measures sound, and yes, strings on a table over the pickup is going to be the same sound.
It's going to make sound.
Yeah, it's going to be actually making at the same distance the same sound as attached to a guitar. But do we? And of course, you know what? Tables, lots of wood, should be good sustain. There's no reason why that shouldn't be good. But once you put that string on a fretboard, you're touching it to metal and wood, which then will affect its ADR. Therefore, it'll be different. So that fretboard and that string and all that will affect it, which in his test wasn't part of it. And I like his tests, but everything affects what comes out in the end. And if it doesn't affect the frequency response in the end that you can perceive, it affected the way we played it. The way you played it if you're a guitar player, or even worse, bass player. I love you guys. So therefore, everything is important. It's either important for the performance, or for the recording, for the precision, or for the sound. But it's different things that are important for different things.
And also, a lot of the Tonewood deniers give them one guitar that's made out of plywood and give them one guitar with nice resonating wood, and I bet you 99.9% of them will pick the other one. Even though they say it doesn't matter, of course it matters.
I love the people saying, well, you know, guitars shouldn't be more than $1,200, $1,500. It doesn't get better after that. You know what? I said that for the longest time. I now have some of the finest guitars on the planet. Thank you, people who gave me those fine guitars. Come here and play them. And then go back to my wall and pick up my beautiful Ibanez RG fixed bridge, $1,400. It's a great guitar, great guitar. There are worlds of differences to the player. Even between my high-end, almost $5,000 Heritage custom core, it's a great guitar, and you pick up the Panucci, there's a jump. There are differences that you can hear on an album. I don't know, probably not. No, probably not. But in how you play it, even if a guitar is aged or not. I mean, Glenn says we listen with our eyes. Yeah, but
in the end, the music is much more important than the overall frequency response of a record, right? The notes that are being played and how they are being played is much more important than the frequency response of a speaker on a record.
I know this is already a long video, but we have to hit on it 5 minutes because you talked about modelers versus amps.
Yeah.
And you just showed in your video, what's it called? Something rectal?
Rectum Fryer?
What's that video called? Watch that video.
Rectifier versus 8 modelers or something.
So he dialed in the sounds in 8 modelers of a rectifier, and most of it in context, indistinguishable. You could record all of those, maybe not the boss, but I'm sorry, but true. You could record all of those and have great sounds, but you got the let's say quad cortex there, and you got the rectifier there. Now, quad cortex or any of them is super convenient. You take that on tour, absolutely. But when you play that rectifier, even though I know for sure, because I watched the video, that in the final result, there would be absolutely no difference, right? You will play that rectifier with a different reverence is the word, with a different respect, with a different
emotion,
a different attitude, because let's say you're a big Mark Tremonti fan,
for example.
Okay.
Somebody.
So Tremonti, whoever played, let's say Tremonti,
Yeah.
And when you play the real amp, you want to do it justice because you're stepping in the footsteps of everyone that played a rectifier, and you want to, in your head, do as well as Tremonti did. You want to make Tremonti proud, blah, 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 blah. But because he played one and he was on, that was the thing on stage. And even though the Helix version sounds 100% exactly the same, Tremonti didn't play a Helix. So when you play the Helix, in your head, you will always, even though it sounds the same, play a facsimile. You're not playing what Tremonti played. You're playing a facsimile of what Tremonti played. And to convince our heads that it's the same thing, even though it actually is sound-wise the same thing.
Almost, but yeah, for the listener. Yeah.
It isn't, the end result will be the same. But the thing is, you will play that real amp differently. Not talking about in the room, not talking about through a cab, we're talking about, I'll explain.
Emotional response.
Yeah. You will play that amp with a different gravitas, with a different attitude than playing the Helix.
Yeah.
And it might be, it might not be so different that it matters, but it might be so different that it matters. So modular versus amp, it's not all about sound. Don't forget that it's music. You can't always measure emotion. You can't always measure attitude. You can't always measure, yeah, cool, instead of, okay, click, cool, Because you're not going to go rock and roll with your Helix. It's convenient. It's what you're going to use on stage. I get it. But you're not going to bring the same attitude to your performance. I mean, come on. I know I'm an old fart, but you go up to your rectifier, go click, click, and then the tubes, and it warms up. And you're going to approach that differently.
Yeah.
And if your attitude towards the gear and your whole performance goes in with like, I'm doing this the right way, then you're going to chug the shit out of it in a different way than calling up some kind of software in your DAW. Nobody can tell me that the approach is the same. And if the approach isn't the same, your performance will be however much different. So I'm not hating on modelers. I'm just saying there is clearly
there's a certain respect that comes through playing a piece of gear like that.
So I think the whole do modelers sound the same? All these videos that Lucas is doing and you're doing and Goose, hey Goose is doing, you're doing great stuff, but that should be a point to make in those videos.
He's making a good point. Yeah.
Because you do sound the same. I've got zero issues with sound, but it's not all sound.
Yeah. How does it make you feel when you're playing through it? And how does it inspire you?
The Fraggle audio system, what's it called? FM something. Fraggle Audio XFX. It's amazing. It can do, I mean, it sounds so good, but it sounds perfect. It sounds not sterile. No. Not cold. No. It sounds just perfect. But there's some interaction, some unexpectedness. It's perfect for the fusion player, which is very brainy music anyway. But give me, I mean, I'm not a fuzz guy, but I load up something with a fuzz and a Marshall in the Fraggle Audio XFX, and it sounds great. But I take a fuzz and I pump it into an amp, and I will play that differently. It will talk to me differently. It's not something I can really put my finger on what exactly that is. It just sounds, that XFX sounds great, and it's so convenient. It's beautifully built, but there's this rock and roll something that's not quite there yet. So, Tonewood and shit. You learned, I don't know, whatever, but maybe something. Everything is important. How much and for what? I think everyone needs to decide for themselves. Some people think pickups,
Listen to yourself in your own emotions when you're playing. Don't listen to one YouTuber who claims a certain thing. Play yourself, play different guitars, and see what happens when you're playing and how they make you feel.
One advice of caution would be, if you have a guitar that you're not gelling with, thinking that it'll be a totally different guitar by changing the pickups, I think never works. Pickup change, even from stock to the highest end Kloppmann that I installed in guitars, ever made it a different instrument. It's
start with a good guitar. Very important.
Yeah. And then usually those guitars have good pickups in them.
Yeah.
So there's really no reason to change them.
True. I mean, that's for people who know what they're doing. Like, oh, I would prefer a pickup with a little bit more attack in the top end or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, the good guitar, the source is very important in my opinion. Yeah.
So
Cool.
everything in the chain matters, but for different things. Something is a sound, frequency, something is saturation, something is attack, something is about how you feel. How does the neck feel? Blah, blah, blah. Everything's important. And listening to Glenn saying, me as an engineer, I only care about the sound. Yeah, but he's making a recommendation to the guy that plays it, because you guys are guitar players, and you listening as a guitar player to Glenn. He only cares about what he gets on his plate when he mixes it, which is relevant. I get that. But then make those recommendations to other engineers. Once you're recommending pickups don't matter, and this doesn't matter, and this doesn't matter to guitar players who have to feel it and react to it emotionally and creatively, then Glenn, you're doing them a disservice. I'm sorry, my friend, I love you, but you're doing them a disservice because you're recommending to them that none of that matters, and you might actually interfere with their performance abilities, because these things do matter for other things. And if they need a more saturated sound, the speaker isn't going to give them a more saturated sound. Buying an angle is going to give them a more saturated sound. If they want a more open sound, you know what? Maybe the guitar is even less important. It is. If they need a more open mid-gain, they need to change a different amp. Know about all of the shit and whatever, buy whatever you want, but use the links under our videos because that helps us. There's no coffee in it anymore. It's totally fake, but we're going to still pretend to drink from it. We're now going to make a video. We're going to take a break, and then we're going to make a video about a Fraggle Audio FM9 programming things in it. I really like calling it Fraggle Audio. I don't know if they're going to...
Freckle.
I just, you know Fraggles, right?
Yeah, Freckle.
Fraggles from, the kids show?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The puppets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fraggle Audio. It's funny. No? Go away. Animals at the end.
Bye.